Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds. And in today's video topic, we're going to be going over the full build guide for the Absolution Necromancer. This is my finished thoughts on the entire archetype as I am about to consolidate some money as I've gotten a lot of stuff so far and I want to consolidate it and make a new build. It's going to be spicy. It's going to be more of a meme build, but you know what? I want to have a little bit of fun now that I have some wealth. So, if you're not already aware, this build was kind of meant to transition into Skeletal Mages, Absolution. Now, I never ended up transitioning into Skeletal Mages because I was having too much fun with Absolution. Now, at this point, at like day 5, I would heavily suggest swapping into Skeletal Mages, but if you're just starting out and you don't have a Dead Reckoning Jewel, then I would suggest Absolution until you feel confident into swapping it to Skeletal Mages. I will probably have a POB of that version down in the description from Shads, the same person who cooperated with me on this build. Now, also as well, this is going to be me talking about the build at length. I'm going to be talking about things in depth. If you want to see gameplay, I will have links in the description. Also as well, if you want to see the daily progress that has been done to get to this point, I have been doing a daily progress report every day since league start as well. So you can see the differences between between when I started and when I ended. Day 1 is a very good one to watch because that's kind of what you expect after day 1 of not having any gear. And of course, now we are going to be finished with the build. Like I said, you'd either have to invest significantly more into the build to make it even more in-game viable, or you would have to go into Skellie mages, which either one is just your preference. But I've gotten to the point where I feel comfortable with the build. I'm probably going to use it to farm a few more bosses for a little bit more currency because my next build is a little bit more expensive, but we're going to move on from that. Now, also as well, like I said, since this has no gameplay, I would heavily suggest if you're like one of those PoE grabbers, you click on a video, you grab the POB, this is not the video for you. There are plenty of people to just blindly copy, and if you want to do that, go right ahead. But if you don't watch the video and you have problems, then I can only help you so much. This is going to be literally as in depth as I possibly could be. So, the first thing off, we're just going to talk about my skill links. We're going to do it like how we do last epoch stuff, because that's what I'm most familiar with. So, for our skill links, we're going with Absolution as the main gem. Obviously, Absolution has a few problems. Mainly, the main problem with Absolution is uptime on bosses if you don't have skill duration. So here I have Divine Flesh socketed in instead of going for Enduring Bond. I think that was kind of a mistake because this increased mini duration is really nice. It brings you from a 12-second duration to like a 20-second duration, which is really nice. But I really like Divine Flesh as well, and you get really tanky because of that. Now, this only matters on bosses like Cirrus, because Cirrus likes to hop around a lot. So if I were to do more Cirruses with this build, I would either transition to Skellie Mages or pull out Divine Flesh. Either way, that's what I would do with that. But overall, Absolution has been a breeze other than that. Sometimes it's a little hard to get started in some maps because if the enemies are too strong, but you pretty much have enough DPS to handle most trash, and your skeletons in well, not your skeletons, I mean your zombies, your specters and stuff will help you out. Of course, we socket it with increased crit chance. We need the base crit and the increased crit to make our Absolutions crit hard enough. Otherwise, this wouldn't work, right? We need increased crit, obviously. Fizz to lightning. So Absolution only applies 50% to lightning from your fizz. So you need this to cap your conversion. Other than that, you'd have to run a triad grips, and that wouldn't work with this build because we're running Algor Mortis. Now we gain physical damage as extra lightning. This is actually really good because it's just a 30% more damage because we have a lot of extra flat because of our skill levels on our Absolution. The increased crit damage, obviously, crit multi is really hard to come by, especially if you're not running a Kingmaker setup on your Animated Guardian like I am. I'm not running that setup, so this increased crit damage is really good. Of course, anomalous minion damage is an absolute chad of a gem for this build because the 3% chance to deal double damage is insane. Because if you didn't know, we're stacking a lot of that on our tree and stuff. That's kind of the whole reason of running Fleshcrafter. And of course, Spell Echo. Spell Echo sadly kind of makes it a little bit harder to like play the build because you're locked in place for a little bit longer, but it makes the clear speed on the Absolution Necromancers Absolution guys absolutely nuts. So it's definitely worth the pain. And of course, it is a 25% chance to summon it on a boss, so you're just hitting them twice a bunch. And once you get some cast speed and attack speed, it feels a little bit better. That's pretty much it for those links. Now, in our helmet, we're running a Devouring Diadem with a lot of reservation efficiency all over the tree. We're running a Determination. Of course, armor is busted right now. We are just by sitting here at 11,000, and if we use just a little bit of stuff for 18,000, that is a lot of armor, especially for a Necromancer. Generosity, of course, not linked to Determination, otherwise it would only give it to your minions, which is not what we want. Generosity, this was a recent addition because I dumped my Animated Guardian setup. So non-curse auras give increased effect. So our Wrath will give our minions more increased effect. And same with the Zealotry. Zealotry gives us crit chance, more spell damage. Then, of course, Wrath will give us additional flat and more lightning spell damage. Now, a friend of mine, Shad's, a person who helped me with the build, he's running Hatred instead. It is a little bit less single target on bosses, or he was running Hatred anyways before he swapped over to Skellie mages, but you would have to swap your reservation cluster here. And the reason why he was running Hatred is because it would just give you the shatters, and the shatters are really good against porcupines and a lot of the league mechanics, on death effects, stuff like that. So if you want better buttery smooth clear and you don't care about single target, that is a good swap. But I would suggest having Wrath for single target if you're doing a bunch of bossing. Now, for of course, Convocation is very important for minion builds. Allows you to reposition your minions, of course. Tempest Shield, spell block. Our problem is we don't get that much spell block at base, so Tempest Shield solves all of our spell block problems. So it gets us close to cap, and then once we do all of our, the curse or what do you call it, the bone offering stuff, we get up close to cap on block, which is nice because of that. Now, Assassin's Mark, they did remove Assassin's Mark on hit rings, which is kind of sad, but it's okay because we can just use a regular Assassin's Mark on hit and then just cast our Assassin's Mark. Since it always stays up no matter what, you don't have to keep casting it over and over again now because it lasts the whole time, which is cool. That's like not a problem. So instead of just hitting them constantly to keep it applied, we just have to press it once and we're good to go. Now, we are running a Convoking Wand with trigger, so it will trigger top to bottom. So you want to have your Desecrate first, because Desecrate will spawn corpses for you. Then your Bone Offering will consume the corpses, which will give you block chance here, which I'll show you in a second if it just does it. It is an 8-second cooldown, but the Bone Offering lasts for a very long time because it consumes a bunch of corpses. And it'll have more while you're mapping, I think, because Desecrate only spawns 5, and I think we can consume 10. I think we can consume a lot of corpses. I don't know, like, how. I don't think there's a limit. You can consume a lot of corpses. Now, this does apply to us at kind of less rate because of Mistress of Sacrifice here. Where is it? It's only 50% reduced effect, but you get a lot of skill effect duration. So this would be like giving us like almost 20% block and spell block, and it also gives us 2% regen if we've blocked recently as well, I believe, which is okay. That's a lot of spell block, like I said, that helps us be tanky. It's one of the main reasons why Necromancer can be so powerful early game, because they get so much free block from this. And of course, Cold Snap. The reason why we're running Cold Snap is because it creates a chilling area, and Algor Mortis makes it so enemies in your chilling areas take 35% increased lightning damage. Now, I suck at placing this, but it will place it on your cursor wherever you're attacking. So as long as you're applying your chilled area, you'll be doing 40% more damage because of this. Well, obviously a little bit more. It goes up to 35%. Never mind, 35% more damage, depending on all your other increased damage modifiers. Now we have Ray Zombie, of course. Zombies have a little bit of a problem staying alive, so that's why we have a elemental army support for max res. This on top of all the max res on our tree helps a lot. The exposure does nothing for us because of Fleshcrafter. Of course, Feeding Frenzy, so that we get a bunch of more damage, increased movement speed and attack speed, which is really nice. 10% more damage, obviously really strong for absolutions. Then Carrion Golem. Carrion Golem just adds a bunch of physical damage for each of our non-golem minions, which is, of course, a lot of flat physical because we have like close to 9, 12, like 15 minions. So this is like times this times 15. So that's really cool. And Ray Spectre, of course. I am running 2 power charge monkeys and 1 what do you call it? 1 arena master. Now, to get the power charge monkeys, you have to go to part 2, go to the part 7, act 7, to Ashen Fields, and you can get a Host Chieftain and a Carnage Chieftain. Carnage Chieftains give you frenzy charges. Host Chieftains gives you power charges. These are very important for the build, and keeping them up is very important because power and frenzy charges give your minions a lot more effect than, like, let's say on you, because you get like 200% increased crit per power charge for your monkeys, I mean for your minions, and of course a bunch of attack and cast speed. So keeping these guys up is very important. And arena champions, they were nerfed recently. They were nerfed eventually, but they give you 20% increased cast, attack, and movement speed if you're near them when they do the buff, which is like all the time. And that's really strong as well. Now you could run the Roa that makes it so enemies take 50% increased lightning damage. That does work. The problem is I don't like having to go into a harvest to resummon my to get my Roa. I don't want to have to go into a harvest, so that's why I went for the arena master. Now to get an arena master also as well, it gives you movement speed and cast speed, which feels really good for you because it also makes your absolution quicker and also makes you have more movement speed, which of course is really strong. Now, to get an arena master, you have to go to a Drox influence map here, one of these Drox influence warlords. It wouldn't cost that much to get it, and then you go through, clear the map, kill the boss, and then you go back through. You spam Desecrate on the ground, or no, you don't spam Desecrate because Desecrate doesn't actually give you anything, and you just summon an arena master. You'll have to do the corpse selection, but you'll eventually find it if you clear the entire map, and they work wonders. I really like its inclusion because it just makes you faster, gives you more movement speed and stuff like that. Then, of course, Flame Dash, of course, for maneuverability. Obviously, Defiance Banner for a bunch of increased armor. Without Defiance Banner here, let me just take it out here. We go from 67 to 76%. Go from, like, where is it? 7,000 to 11,000. That shows you how little increased armor we have. That's why eventually, when you get enough block and stuff through other means, you could dump this and go for a Granite Flask with increased armor on it, and that'd be really good. Then, of course, Molten Shell on our left click. Molten Shell is really strong. Vol Molten Shell is also really strong. Whenever you're using armor, it's very strong because it's a lot of DR. Whenever your Molten Shell is up, you're very, very tanky. And same thing with your Vol Molten Shell because it's just an extra one. And that's pretty much it for skills. Now, for the passives here, so you do the usual witch setup here, right? The most important stuff is stuff like Divine Flesh. I am running a Glorious Vanity for Divine Flesh, so I gain max chaos res, and I have a little bit of max chaos res on a jewel over there. And this makes it so we take a little bit less elemental damage on top of being max chaos res, which works well with Forbidden Taste because it, takes 25% of our max life taking chaos. And if we have more max chaos res, we take less of that damage per second. So instead of just taking a bunch of damage, we don't actually take that much damage at all, which is really strong. And it's just free HP. And of course, like I said, this helps you with max Ellie res and makes you tankier versus elemental damage, which is really nice. While also, of course, making you tankier versus chaos, which dots are one of your biggest problems with this build because armor doesn't work against fire dots or chaos dots. I don't think it works on fizz dots. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. I think it does work against fizz dots, and of course, like it just helps you versus everything. It's really nice, especially poison. Now, our cluster jewel setups, mainly we're going for a bunch of renewals here. Minions have 5% chance to deal double damage. You could get a better cluster jewel than this. This just cost me like a few C and just get something with renewal. 5% chance to deal double damage with their full life. With Flesh Crafter, they're always on full life because of the way the chaos resistance works. Oh, I forgot to go in D&D. And for the mediums, you don't want too many dread marches. You just want enough dread marches, because if you have too many, Flesh Crafter will actually end up killing your zombies thanks to Flesh Crafter, because like it'll pretty much reduce their HP to 0. And of course, renewals can go on mediums as well, which is really strong. And of course, just an abyss jewel, some avoid on it. Same thing with our other medium cluster jewel. We do have one mana reservation efficiency like cluster, and that's for Wrath, so that we can fit all these auras in. Without this, you wouldn't be able to fit a Defiance banner, I believe, in, which would suck. So having this cluster is nice. It was like 10 chaos. It's pretty cheap. Our other cluster is just the same thing, same setup, renewal. This dread march puts me over the edge, so you got to be careful with how many dread marches you get. So I had to swap this out, but it's too late now. And of course, Born of Chaos for the maximum chaos res to mesh well with the divine flesh. Now, other stuff, of course, the increased minion damage stuff, the increased reservations, very important, of course. HP, more HP, block stuff. It's your stereotypical Path of Exile stuff. We do have Death Attunement Anointed on our amulet, and that's so we can have the third Spectre. It saves me like 5 points, and we're very like starving for points, which sucks, but it's like it helps out a lot by having that there. And that's pretty much it for the passive tree. It's pretty simple. It's like your stereotypical minion passive tree. Like I said, in the description, there'll be, like I said, the full build guides and how I went from nothing to this. So like you can see what I did and what I changed as I went along. Now for gearing itself, helmet, of course, eventually you want a devouring diadem. Devouring diadem not only gives you Feast of Flesh, which pretty much if you're consuming 10 corpses, it just gives you like 4k life, like 400 per corpse nearby. That's a lot of HP recovery. That on top of our Taste of Blood gives us a lot of HP recovery. So as long as something doesn't one-shot us, we're pretty much capped on life, which is really nice. Plus the level selected gems is really nice with our levels of Wrath and Zealotry and stuff and Determination, which is really cool. And of course, reduce reservation efficiency. This allows us to run as many auras as we are, because every single aura we run gives our minions 3% increased attack and cast speed, which is really important because you want as much cast speed on your minions as possible for your Absolution minions, right? And of course, Eldritch Battery. The reason why we really like the item is because it saves us the points to get up to Eldritch Battery. Without this, our mana is insane with Absolution. It's like 100 mana per, but thanks to the way Eldritch Battery works, we have plenty of mana to do everything we want. So you'll have to use Eldritch Battery until you get a diadem. So that's one of the reasons why diadem is important. I wasn't able to self-farm one. I did a few Katarinas. I didn't drop any, so I ended up just spending one. I did drop a Paradoxica, so it's kind of like you can just swap them out, right? Really. Then for the shield, any shield works, but I like chance to avoid ailments, chance to block. Obviously, you can get a much better shield than this. This is just trash, right? This build wasn't really meant to like go too far into endgame. This was just meant to unlock my Atlas and stuff, right? So I didn't really invest too much into it. Then, of course, amulet, +1 to gems. We want +1 to all lightning or physical or spell gems, because Absolution is really nice because it's spell, minion, duration, AoE, physical, and lightning. So a lot of things apply to it. So there's a lot of different kinds of amulets and different kinds of plus to gem stuff you can use. And of course, I crafted minimum endurance charges. I am at 3 minimum endurance charges, and that saves me a cluster jewel setup. Instead of running the one that gives you endurance charge every second, we can just run min endurance charges, which is really nice. Makes us feel tankier. We may have 4k life, but we have a lot of effective HP because of that. Then, of course, our rings here, minimum endurance charges, chaos res, HP. It's like the usual. Same thing with this one. I had to buy this one. This was like 2x actually at the time of me buying it because I needed the intelligence, I needed the HP, I needed the chaos res. And then, of course, later on when I capped my resistances, I was able to slam minimum endurance charges on it as well because the 12% reduced physical damage taken on top of the extra resistance is nice so that we can cap our resistance quicker. Obviously, my fire resistance isn't perfect, but I'd have to go divine stuff. Now, Flesh Crafter, of course, this is what makes the build tick. Minions are, whenever they have energy shield, thanks to Flesh Crafter converting their HP to energy shield, it means their hits ignore elemental resistances. And since they have energy shield and not HP, our renewals are almost always into effect for Absolution minions, especially if we keep refreshing them and resummoning them, meaning we ignore elemental resistances. So this chest is essentially a 7 link, right? And that's really strong because whenever enemies have like resistances, we don't care. So that's why we do so much damage versus bosses. Then for the gloves, Outer Mortis, enemies in your chilling areas take 35% increased lightning damage. We really like this because this chilling area, it's just 40% more damage. This is like absolutely insane. One of the best items in the build. It's like 5 chaos right now. Like obviously it's like a must include. The boots here, I got chance to avoid ailments because I am ailment capped. You want as much avoid ailment as possible so that you can avoid ailments, obviously, not get frozen all the time, not get ignited all the time. So having that on the suffix, on the implicit, I didn't put too much into this. I just threw a bunch of essences on it till I got what I wanted with dexterity. Then, of course, put, the implicits on. Obviously, I could improve these implicits, but right now it doesn't really matter now. The belt. This belt is insane for this build. And why is that? Not only are we getting to avoid cap with our ailments, we're also getting increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently, up to like, I think it's like 40% increase. It's like 35% increased. And that's really insane. Of course, we have chance to avoid bleeding. We're 75% avoid bleed cap right now, and that on top of our flask of immunity to bleeding is plenty, right? So like that on top of that is enough to keep us there. And eventually you want to go for double minion damage gems, eventually jewels. And that is insane. Like this belt's insane for this build because of that. Because we're always using a minion skill because of Absolution. So we're always have that increased damage up, right? So that's why that prefix is really strong. Of course, the minion additional max res makes sure that they're capped on res. Flasks, Forbidden Taste, obviously, when you when you take a savage hit. So in the footage, you'll see whenever I take a big hit, you don't see it because Forbidden Taste pops up and I'm back at full HP. This is pretty much a cast when damage taken flask. Our flasks don't help our minions much, so this is like just an extra cast when damage taken setup on our flask, and it's really strong. The only problem is when you're fighting stuff like the titty bitches, the ones from Eater Influence, they'll do a bunch of medium-sized hits and it won't trigger. This is really good against things that hit you really hard, but not good against things that hit you very small attacks. But that's fine because we have like block and stuff. And of course, Ruma's Concoction. This is pretty much a stopgap. You want this until you get enough block chance. I wasn't able to invest enough to get enough block chance, but obviously later on you could dump this for a granite flask with increased armor on it. Quicksilver Flask, force movement speed, gain charges when you're hit by an enemy where you're being hit all the time. We don't have any avoidance mechanics other than block, and block still counts as a hit. So just being able to fill up our movement speed flask while mapping is really strong. Movement speed is really good. I'm running a Taste of Hate. This on top of the Divine Flesh setup makes us take a lot less physical damage for free. And of course, less cool damage as well, which is then multiplicative with the less physical. And that on top of our endurance charges and all that and armor is enough to make it so we're not dying to physical hits all the time. And of course, I am running one life flask. Uh, this is good. Like just one life flask is plenty. Gain charges when you're hit by an enemy, so you're always having it up. Of course, the immunity to bleeding. You just don't technically need all this avoid chance to bleed, but when you have this, but it's just better safe than sorry. It helps a lot while mapping. You don't get bled for a bunch of reasons for no reason, right? So I really like this flask. Really like this flask. I didn't quality it. I forgot about that. As you can tell, like this build's like between a lot of investment and a lot of not investment. Like I'm at like 20x investment, but the things I invested in are things that are easily resellable, like Flush Crafter, or things I will use in future builds, like the Devouring Diadem and stuff like that. So it's like, doesn't matter. Uh, that's pretty much it for gearing. Uh, and then I think that's pretty much it for the entirety of the build. Like I said, the build itself felt amazing. For stuff we did with the build, we did. We almost finished my atlas. I just had to do a few more maps, but I can do that with a different character with a better mapper. I've been farming Eater of Worlds with this mod. Increased shrines. The reason why we really altars. The reason why we like this is it gets us a lot of scarabs. Now scarabs right now their price went down because there's so many, but they sell really well in bulk, especially these like polished ones. They sell really well in bulk. So that's where a bulk of my money came from. Selling flasks where a bulk of my money came from. Selling extra ichors is where a bulk of my money came from. Just selling things in bulk and doing bosses and selling the boss drops. Like I've dropped a flask. I've dropped 2 cortexes as well because of all my boss rushing. These nodes, the Guardian's Aid plus Remnants and Gaze into the Abyss, is absolutely insane for Elder Guardian and Shaper maps. I've gotten all of my maps for that for my completions from these. I haven't had to buy a single Shaper, Elder, or Conqueror map ever. I've just dropped them just by doing maps. I've dropped 2 cortexes already from these nodes from when I put them on, and I've also dropped a bunch of innumerable amounts of all the other ones as well, which I end up just selling because I don't need them right now for completion because I don't have a build that can do the feared or probably the what is it the not the twisted the forgotten. I don't have a build that can do that yet, so I've done a bunch of forums already. I think I've done like 5 different forums already. I tried a Maven. It didn't feel good for Maven. My thing is, this build can do Maven, but I suck at Maven because I'm back from Path of Exile from like 2 years break. So I suck at Maven right now. So if you were to take this build and do Maven, you'd probably do way better than me. Obviously, you would want to invest into skeletal mages by that point. And that's pretty much it for the build and what I've done with it. I'm pretty happy where it got. Like I said, if I were to continue this build even more, I would just swap into Skellie mages and then destroy the entire game, but that's kind of boring, so that's why I didn't do that. That's why I kept going with Absolution. Now, I will be working on the next build. With all that being said, thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your river and